30 years after Nelson Mandela was released from prison, has South Africa been able to break free from the shackles of apartheid, or does its legacy still live on? Hello and welcome to Bigger Than Five with me, Rida Fakhri. 30 years ago this week, Nelson Mandela walked free. After 27 years in prison, the release of the anti-apartheid revolutionary leader marked the beginning of a new era for South Africa. A week earlier, under growing domestic and international pressure and the threat of civil war, then President F.W. de Klerk announced the unbanning of the African National Congress and other anti-apartheid groups. He ended a state of emergency, allowed the release of political prisoners, and put a moratorium on the death penalty. But that was not the end of apartheid. It took 4 more years of negotiation and violent struggle before a new constitution came into effect, allowing blacks and other racial groups to vote. In 1994, South Africans went to the polls and elected Nelson Mandela as president of a new democratic government. Yet it has still been a long walk to freedom for black South Africans, who make up about 80% of the population. Economic inequality remains stark, GDP growth is less than 1%, and corruption is rampant. Former President Jacob Zuma is currently on trial for money laundering and fraud. This week, to mark the 30th anniversary of Mandela's release, current President Cyril Ramaphosa, who led the team overseeing the historic event of February 11, 1990, quoted from Mandela's speech as he stood on the balcony of Cape Town City Hall after his release. This is what he said: "The need to unite the people of our country is as important a task now as it has always been." Shortly, we'll be speaking with former President F.W. de Klerk about his decision to release Mandela from prison. But first, we go to Cape Town to hear from a young activist about how he remembers the man known to many by his clan name Madiba, and how he views the legacy of apartheid in South Africa.
This is the literal design of apartheid, to have the rich and the poor be so racially divided. The lack of dignity and the lives that most black South Africans in townships lead, it's not only disheartening, but just shows you how much they have been failed by public service, by politics. If you're not outraged, then you're not paying attention. If you look quite closely there, you should be able to see Robben Island, which is where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned. In many ways, Mandela symbolizes the triumph of the human spirit against adversity. I was not born in 1994, so I have no recollection of what that unity looks like. But to me, it just sounds like an illusion, that this idea of the rainbow nation, that we all come together for sports or democracy, is not sustained across other parts that fundamentally change people's quality of life. It's quite hard to say that Mandela's legacy is still alive, given the fact that youth unemployment is at an all-time high. The income distribution inequality in South Africa is the biggest in the world. I think the highest symbol of apartheid's legacy in South Africa is how close inequality lives within somewhat the same radius. You don't even have to walk far to see it. When you think about apartheid, how do you feel?
Apartheid. We still have apartheid here in Mozambique. It's too much.
There is still apartheid.
No, apartheid now is done, but not just done for everybody.
What does it look like?
Even there, if you go in there by the shop, if you are in first time with white people chasing you, that's way, just because they very heavy money, too much money. To us, even if you are going there, you're looking for the job, they chase you like times the dogs.
I think our political elders are the big reason why South Africa has not moved forward, are the big reason why we still complain about issues of gender-based violence, are the big reason why we still complain about high levels of youth unemployment, are the big reason why the country hasn't fundamentally shifted in terms of the quality of lives of black people in this country. I think a lot of young people have taken it upon themselves to say, Our voices have never been heard, and the only way that we can make them heard is if we begin to drive the change that we want. To say to people they must just move on, you're saying to them, forget what currently keeps you shackled, keep on trying. Without strong economic policies that take into account race, telling people to move on is telling people go die.
Former South African President F.W. de Klerk's decision to set Nelson Mandela free 30 years ago opened a new chapter in the country's history, but it was just the beginning of a long process of peace and reconciliation and the culmination of secret negotiations that ultimately put an end to apartheid. The two men were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for laying the groundwork for a new democratic South Africa. I sat down with President de Klerk at the World Mind Symposium in Zurich and asked him why he decided to finally release Mandela.
The most important part of what happened in February 1990 was the speech I made when I opened Parliament on the 2nd of February 1990, where I already announced in principle the release of Mr. Mandela. But in that speech, I've put together a package which would remove and was designed to remove each and every objection the African National Congress could have not to come and sit down around the table and negotiate with us a new dispensation. It included the release of all political prisoners. It included the lifting of the state of emergency. Most importantly, it included the unbanning of the African National Congress, of the SA Communist Party, even of the armed wing of the African National Congress, Umkhonto weSizwe.
And for that you got more heat from some of the white Afrikaners than for the release of Mandela himself.
Oh yes, they were flabbergasted. But I've come to this conclusion that we need to take these bold steps. Before I became president in September 1989. But before then, the ruling National Party, which established apartheid originally as a policy, had deep self-analysis process through which we put ourselves. And we reached the conclusion that we have to admit that we have failed through separate development, through the establishment of so many nation states, to bring justice to all. And that we could not build the future of our own people on the basis of continued injustice. We had to admit apartheid was wrong.
But did you admit apartheid was wrong based on the moral principles behind it, or was it dictated to a large extent by the economic reality? Let's face it, South Africa was under sanctions. You were losing quite considerably around the world, moral support and economic.
True, sanctions played a role. But I can honestly testify that the whole process was conscience-driven. It was the admission that we cannot build the future of South Africa on the basis any longer of separation. That we had to make a 180-degree turn if we want to bring justice to all.
For you, it was a way to protect and salvage South Africa for the white community as well. Not
Yes.
quite the way many of them saw it.
If we didn't do what we did, there would have been a catastrophe in South Africa. We could have looked like Syria today.
But today, looking back, do you feel that you've made enough headway? I was in South Africa, in Cape Town, in fact, your hometown, just last September, and I was struck by the level of structural injustice that still seems to permeate society, largely affecting the black community.
I think apartheid can be blamed for some of it, but not for all of it. Fact is, we've also had a number of years, especially the last 10 years, of very bad governance. What President Mandela, when he became president, inherited was a stable economy, although suffering because of sanctions, but sanctions were immediately lifted. All the doors throughout the international community opened for South Africa. We had a wonderful opportunity. In the early 2000s, we achieved a growth rate of more than 5% in real terms per annum. Today it's 0.6. That's not due to apartheid. That's due to bad governance, to policy uncertainty, to far-left socialist tendencies, within the ruling party, with too much power to the trade unions. All those factors contribute to the bad present financial situation.
Corrupt practices by some political leaders who succeeded you. Jacob Zuma, having been indicted on corruption charges and money laundering just last March. What does it take to have leaders like you and Nelson Mandela? And the story goes in the press that the two of you really didn't get on very well. Is that true?
I think leadership, and what he and I shared, leadership is not about giving people what the opinion polls say they want. Leadership is having a vision, is having action plans to ensure that that vision can be implemented, and then convincing your support base, your constituency, that this will be best for them. This is what I had to do with white South Africans. And this is what Mr. Mandela had to do with his own party. The end result of our negotiations did not please fully his own people. They say he made too many compromises. It did not please my people fully. They said I made too many compromises. But it was a good new constitution that we negotiated. And it was our joint will and conviction that unless we do this, there would be a catastrophe in South Africa.
You made your political, moral calculations, and you also both decided it was a risk worth taking. What would you say about Mandela that struck you about him as a leader, besides the fact that you say he was a very good listener, and both of you being lawyers, being good listeners?
He was a very special man. He was a man of great integrity. He always kept his word. He was analytical in his thinking, as I've tried to be also throughout my life. And we clicked because we were lawyers, as you say, and because both of us are also good listeners and didn't interrupt each other right from the beginning. We built this mutual feeling, I can do business with this man.
So you weren't mortal enemies, as some journalists used to like to say.
At sometimes we were clashing head on, yes.
At which point did you realize that he was more of a friend than a foe?
I would say nearer to our joint retirement. We retired quite near to each other. And in retirement, we really became good friends. Yeah. We had lunches and dinners together. We phoned each other regularly. And we really became almost friends in the real sense of it.
You say almost friends, yet this is what he said about you. He apparently said, my worst nightmare is to wake up one morning and you, is not here. Did he say this to you, or did you just read about it?
He didn't say it to me in so many words, but he did against the wishes of his own party, give credit to the role that I and my party played. And he was very sort of magnanimous in doing so publicly on a regular basis.
Not easy for you to have convinced the ruling white minority who had clung to power for decades that they should now abandon that power, not as a sign of surrender in the way you saw it, but for survival and conversion. Your life was at risk sometimes, yet it was worth taking that risk.
Absolutely. There were great risks, and at one point in the negotiations, around about the beginning of the end of 1991, the tide amongst the white electorate turned against me. And I was under pressure from the far-right white opposition party to call an election and say I no longer had a mandate for what I was doing. Yeah. I then took the big risk of calling a referendum, posing the question, you now know where we're going, because it was quite transparent, the negotiations. Must I go ahead, yes or no?
And you got a resounding 69% yes.
69.9% voted yes in favor, and that reinvigorated my mandate, and I could move ahead and sign deals.
And you got that result on your birthday?
I got that, absolutely. It was the biggest birthday presents I ever got.
Definitely a memorable one. When you look at at Robben Island. We all know Robben Island. I actually went and visited Robben Island just a few months ago, as I say, and saw that cell in which Mandela was kept. You, I believe from your garden, actually see Robben Island. What goes through your mind?
Well, just a footnote. He wasn't kept in that cell
For 27 years. But for
for
18,
his
I
full
believe.
term.
Yeah.
In the last years, he was housed in a proper little flat almost. He had a TV and he had a butler serving him, etc., etc. He was treated as a very important prisoner.
Right. But he did spend a number of years
He
there.
did spend a number of years in that cell.
Yeah.
The tragedy of it all was that a man like he was kept in prison for so long. He was nonetheless so strong in his commitment towards a peaceful solution that he showed a remarkable lack of bitterness, notwithstanding what he had to undergo. He came forward and proved through deeds and words that he was not bitter about it at all, that he felt he did what he did. He served the sentence that he served for the sake of a better South Africa for all its people.
I know that you used to write on a daily basis for a while letters to Nelson Mandela, telling him about the state of the country, the state of the world. 19 letters, in fact, that were published in a book. So if you were to write one more letter, how optimistic might it be?
I would lament in my letter about the present state of affairs in South Africa. And I would write to him and say, it's time that the values for which we stood and which we succeeded in encapsulating in one of the best constitutions in the world should be revived again and should be the ideal to strive for, and that we should use our collective experience to help South Africa to do the right thing again.
Mandla Mandela, Nelson Mandela's grandson, joins me now from Cape Town. He's a member of Parliament for the African National Congress and is chief of the Mvezo Traditional Council. Mr. Mandela, you were still a teenager when your grandfather was released from jail. To the outside world, he was Nelson Mandela, the great Nelson Mandela, the icon, the ultimate symbol of resistance to oppression and injustice, a rare, towering figure. But to you as a grandson, what did he represent and what does his legacy mean for you today?
When I was only 9 years old in 1983, I met my grandfather for the first time at Paulsmoor Prison. And that brought a whole lot of questions to me in that 45-minute visit I had. Here was a man introducing himself to me as my grandfather, and yet he was in prison. And for me as a 9-year-old, prisons were for people that had done wrong in society. And I became a very angry, bitter young man at the fact that I had a grandfather that was in prison. And Madiba, with the wisdom vested in him, could understand the exactly emotions that were coming out during the visit. And he penned down a letter to a comrade and friend of his, Helen Joseph, and said, "Dear Helen, I've just had a visit for my grandson who is the heir of the family, but I'm rather concerned about his English. Can you assist in his development?" And Helen chuckled at this and made me read the letter. And I thought to myself, oh, my grandfather thought I was backward. And Helen Joseph said, you know, this is exactly what the apartheid regime thought. It's an encoded letter from your grandfather that you went to visit him and you didn't know who he was and the ideals that he stood for, and as well as his commitment to the struggle for liberation of our people. And he has asked me to educate you about who Mandela is. And the irony in that was there was my grandfather reaching out to a white woman, a comrade of his, a friend of his, to educate me about him. Whereas white people were a representation of oppression in South Africa.
Your grandfather dedicated his life to fighting oppression and injustice. But when we look at his legacy today, was there too much focus on reconciliation, on forgiveness, and too little on justice and accountability?
Not at all. I think the greatest achievement, particularly of my grandfather, is that of reconciliation, nation building, and ensuring that we have unity among South Africans. You must understand that we are coming from 350 years of colonialism, coupled with 60 years of apartheid, oppressive and brutal regime on the oppressed people of South Africa. And 25 years later into our democracy, the challenges that we are seeing today, such as xenophobia, such as the violence, gender-based violence, is the reality that we have not dealt properly with the past experiences.
And is that precisely because there was a missed opportunity to hold those who implemented the structural racial injustices against Black South Africans accountable?
Many young South Africans and South Africans at the time when we embarked on the agenda of reconciliation would have wanted a lot more to come out from the oppressive regime of the apartheid government. President F.W. de Klerk himself refused to apologize to South Africans for their part and the role they played during the apartheid era. It was only Madiba that took the responsibility to say that we have done some wrongdoings and we take full responsibility for that, and he apologized to the nation.
But is what we're seeing today in South Africa, high crime, high unemployment, the levels of corruption, is that the legacy of apartheid, or is it what former President F.W. de Klerk told me recently, the effects of bad governance? Let's face it, you've had corrupt ANC leaders who've siphoned off tens of billions of dollars that were meant for the reconstruction, that were meant for undoing the damages done by apartheid.
If we are to talk about corruption, then let's speak about corruption in its entirety. Let's speak about corruption in the 60 years of apartheid's regime. Let's speak about the effects of colonialism and the looting of resources out of the African continent to enrich the masters in Europe. But one of the challenges that we are facing that has actually heightened corruption is that individualism has come to be rife.
You are an ANC member. Of course, your grandfather was a loyal and lifelong ANC member, but he was also a pragmatist. I mean, this is what he once said. He said, you must support the African National Congress only so far as it delivers the goods. If the ANC does not deliver the goods, you must do to it what you have done to the apartheid regime. Would he still support the ANC in the state it's in today?
Absolutely. My grandfather will continue to serve and support the ANC with all its challenges that we are facing today. Remember that in the post-apartheid era, we have already built 6 million houses. We have brought electricity to far more people than what they had pre-1994, particularly in rural South Africa. We have electricity. We have enabled villages in rural South Africa to have access to clean drinkable water. So there has been achievements that we have been able
but you've
to
also had sprawling shanty towns that exist right next door to big white gated communities. Despite all of this, the inequalities that still exist, you have said that the election of Cyril Ramaphosa a few months ago, the current president, who has actually been in office 2 years this month, you said that it ushered in a new dawn.
Well, it has instilled hope to many South Africans. And you must look at the issue of why my grandfather actually looked at Cyril Ramaphosa as his successor. Because in that, he was dealing with the issue of tribalism within the ANC. And this is why he wanted someone either than a Nguni-speaking person to rise to being a president of the country, so that you can truly translate that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. But I think the president and the ANC at large today faces serious challenges to root out corruption and to ensure also that we embark on a project of unity and ensuring that we have nation building within the country.
Mandla Mandela, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And so while apartheid was abolished in law a quarter of a century ago, its socio-economic effects endure to this day, with a new generation of South Africans continuing to grapple with the legacy of a system rooted in racial discrimination, economic deprivation and oppression. And while many still argue that the wounds of apartheid were never fully treated and its crimes never prosecuted, they blame today's ANC for betraying the ideals of the revolution that Nelson Mandela embodied. For more than 50% of South Africans born post-apartheid who did not witness its brutality, the words of Madiba spoken 30 years ago ring as true today as they did back then. Now, he said, is the time to intensify the struggle on all fronts. To relax our efforts now would be a mistake which generations to come will not be able to forgive. From me, Rida Fakhri, and all the team here in Washington, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.